Assalamu alaikum, my dear participants. Welcome to a new session of the Islam Study Circle. Uh, we have already begun. I'm just about to press the button, start broadcast. Okay. Uh, the Quranic verse that I have selected today is verse 103 of Surah Al Imran, and its words are واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون. A simple translation of this verse would be, and hold fast to the rope of God and be not divided. And bear in mind God's favor on you when you were enemies of one another. So he united your hearts, and with his grace you became brothers, and you stood at the very brink of an abyss of fire, and he saved you from it. In this manner, God explains to you his revelations so that you may be guided. My dear participants, you can clearly see that this is a very, very special verse of the Quran, and it throws light on the fact that the biggest source of uniting Muslims all over the world, the strongest source of bringing them together, is the Quran itself. It has been called the rope of God, and this metaphor is has a very, very special significance. So a rope is something which is stretched between two different parts. And of course, when it refers here to the rope as the Quran, on the one side we have the Almighty, and on the other side we have ourselves. So if we have to connect to the Almighty, the best way to do so is through the Quran. And in fact, the verse goes on to tell us that if we want to sever all types of differences, if we want to come about all types of differences, and we have to resolve, in fact, all types of differences, then the Quran is the answer. The Quran is the rope which stretches from earth right up to the Almighty. And through it, we are guided together. Through it, we are glued together. And hence, this should be one of our foremost undertakings every day. And the verse actually goes on to say that the favor of the Almighty on the people of Arabia in those times was that when He actually united them, and they were in fact so distraught with each other, they were so against each other, that it was the Almighty's mercy and His Quran surely which became that rope, which became that adhesive tape between them that brought them together. And then, of course, the Quran is absolutely clear on this, that this is the document of the Almighty. This is the source of the Almighty, which tells us that the differences that we have, the way we speak to each other, the way we might differ with each other, they have to be resolved in the light of the Quran. It is the Quran which actually guides us in all these matters. And hence, we have to be very, very protective of the fact that it is this book which is going to keep us together. So, conversely, you can see very, very clearly that if this rope does not exist between us, if this rope is not there for us, there are bound to be differences. And today, I think this is a very, very vivid example of how, since we have left this rope to itself, since we are no longer holding on fast to this rope the way we should be, we are left wandering in wilderness and in darkness. Our only inspiration from the Quran is that we generally read it, the Arabic part, without understanding what the words actually are, and hence you can clearly see that as a result of this, the bond which should develop between ourselves and the Almighty never develops. It becomes more of a ritualistic, a mechanical approach in which we are reciting out certain words which have absolutely no meaning to us. And hence, they are not able to move us, they are not able to change us, and they are not able to do anything in us. So we have to realize this fact that it is a huge blessing of the Almighty that He has stretched His rope from His own self to ourselves through the Quran. He has called this Quran a rope between Him and ourselves, and has guaranteed us that if we hold on fast to this rope, there is not going to be any difference of opinion, or at least if there is a difference of opinion, there always will be something which will bring us back and refer us back in a way that we are able to resolve this difference. And my dear viewers, we need to realize that this Quran is something which we need to reflect on as much as we can. We must fix a part of the day, a time of the day, maybe when we start the day or maybe when we end our day, whatever is convenient to us, that we must pick up the book. We might read it sequentially. At times, it's more easy to pick up and just open it from wherever it does open and start reading it. And the best way to read the Quran is to read a good translation of the Quran if one is not aware of the language, and refer any questions which may arise to either a scholar or to any commentary or tafsir of the Quran. Always remember that reading a tafsir is not a very recommended thing. Tafsirs are like dictionaries. And just as we consult dictionaries, we don't read dictionaries. In a similar manner, we should consult tafsir whenever needed. We are not required to go through them cover to cover, because this, of course, would be needless, because a lot of times the questions never arise in our minds, and hence it's much more better to link ourselves directly to the translation. The second important thing here is that the more we link ourselves to a translation of the Quran, the more are we able to directly link ourselves to the Almighty. Because when the element of tafsir creeps in, more often than not, human opinion actually starts taking its place and also presenting itself. So that should be as minimum as possible. Only when there is a question that arises in our mind should we take up this challenge of going through a tafsir. And also, as far as the Quran is concerned, we have to realize that in spite of the fact that all of us study the Quran and try to understand it, there still may be a difference in comprehension. There still might be areas in which we might not have the same view. Again, we have to refer back to the Quran. And if there is a difference of opinion, if there is a portion of the Quran in which there are several opinions before us, then we have to weigh the arguments of each opinion. The way that we need to understand the Quran is to address the arguments which are proffered in favor of an opinion, because this is the only way that we will get to know what what merit is actually entitled to which opinion. And this can only happen if we, instead of getting confused or instead of getting put off because of a number of opinions that we might be seeing, the real approach to the Quran is that we have to, at times, conduct a comparative study of the reasoning of various views and then form our own opinion. And of course, when we form our own opinion, we must also realize that opinions also keep changing, because many a time the data that we have is not coherent, or it's not in congruence. And when we read the Quran again, at times our own intellect develops, at times we are brought up or we face new data, and hence our own understanding of the Quran also increases and enhances. So there is no reason to be dogmatic, there is no reason to hold a final word regarding what we have understood. We have to be humble seekers of the truth, and the best way to do so is to keep on reflecting on the Quran, keep on trying to understand it. And my dear viewers, may I dare also add that perhaps one of the greatest responsibilities that we owe to our next generation is to transfer this legacy of understanding the Quran to the next generation. And this can only happen if we allow them to question anything which comes to their mind, not only regarding the Quran, but also regarding important issues in contemporary thought and learning. So, in order to urge our next generation to read the Quran, to understand the Quran, as I always try to bring up this point, that we have to entertain all their questions. And in fact, we have to encourage critical thinking. We often talk about critical thinking. We have often taken up this issue. And let me retake it once again, that critical thinking is of foremost importance, not only when we are studying religion. It is, in fact, the searchlight, it is the torch we should shine in every realm of our intellect, in every realm that we intend to tread upon. So, this critical thinking is the way in which you question certain things that you come to our mind, and you don't lull them to sleep. You never put them to sleep just because you think that this is something which does not relate to us, or maybe we can just hush it up. So, whenever a question comes to our mind, it is essential that we address it. We try to resolve it to the best of our ability. And as you can clearly see, that this Quranic verse is so explicit. It says that if we do so, then the Almighty brings our hearts together. It says people who were enemies, Arabs were enemies to one another, but the Almighty ended up فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ فَأَصْبَحْتُمْ بِنِعْمَتِهِ إِخْوَانًا, that He joined their hearts together as a result of this Quran, and says that these enemies became brothers of one another. They were cutting throats of each other. There were daggers drawn against each other. But once they stuck to the Quran, it was as if they became a single united front. So this is a very essential topic, of course, that we all need to address in our own capacities. And let me end here by once again reminding ourselves that this is a responsibility. This is an obligation that we owe to our younger generation, and let us be alive to this responsibility. Viewers, now let us take up the next section of this first segment, and that is the hadith that we are going to study today. This hadith is taken from the Sahih of Imam Muslim. The words of this hadith are: عن أبي هريرة أن الأقرع بن حابس أبصر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقبل الحسن فقال إن لي عشرة من الولد ما قبلت واحدا منهم فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إنه من لا يرحم لا يرحم. So a simple translation of this would be that Abu Huraira reports that Al-Aqra ibn Habis saw the Prophet kissing his grandson Hassan. Whereupon Aqra said, I have 10 children, and I never kissed any one of them. At this, God's messenger said, he who is not affectionate to others will not be shown affection from God. Subhanallah. So you can clearly see the extent of what we are witnessing here. The Almighty, through His Prophet, is actually trying us, or He is sending us this message that softness, kindness, gentleness, affection, this is something which is of paramount importance. And such is the nature of this, that the Almighty has said that a person who is not affectionate to others, of course, He has said to His Prophet, God's messenger. So God's messenger, conveying this purport, says that he who is not affectionate to others will not be shown affection by the Almighty, telling us how essential affection is, telling us how important affection is, to be gentle, to be kind, to look after one another. And see here, especially what has been mentioned, and that is the Prophet was emotionally attached to his grandson. So he picked up Hassan once and he started kissing him the way we do to our children. And the person who was actually observing him said that he never did so, or he never did so to the 10 children that he had. And the Prophet, of course, was not very pleased, very particularly pleased at this attitude. And he actually said that a person who does not show affection to others, of course, here the meaning was that if you don't emotionally express yourselves towards your children, if you don't show your emotions to your children, it is as if you have not expressed your affection towards them. Expressing affection towards our children, telling them how we feel for them, it's very, very essential. At times, we take things for granted. At times, we think that whatever we have given them, or maybe the facilities that we provide them, they are sufficient for to show our affection. But we subtract the human element without realizing how important, if not the most important, it is. The most important element in our relationship towards our fellow human beings, especially to our children, is not just to provide them or maybe give them money and resources, but a much, much more thing which is needed is to express our own emotional affection, our emotional attachment to them. Because, dear viewers, you would agree with this that all of us have this psychological weakness that we need encouragement from others. We need the this boost from others in which when they look at us, when they encourage us, it really has its effect. It's a tremendous boost that we get when people see that we are doing something and they express their praise, they express their encouragement. It is as if we have received fresh blood in ourselves and we feel as if we are rejuvenated and we would like to do much more than what we are doing. So you can clearly see that that God's prophets are very, very expressive of their own emotions. We know that Prophet Muhammad one time he lost one of his sons, Abraham, in infancy. And when he was dying, he was called upon by one of his companions to come and see that his son had just passed away and witness or express his own feelings. And we know there's a hadith which tells us when the Prophet came, he was intensely sad. He was very sad. In fact, there were tears in his eyes. And he said what we can now really put before us as an immense guideline. He said, although my tears are shedding tears, and although my heart is full of grief, but I consign myself to the will of God. Subhanallah. So it's as if he's saying that I would not subtract human emotions. It is not that I would say that I'm not aggrieved at the passing away of my son. I am so disturbed, I am so distraught that my heart is full of grief. My eyes are shedding tears. But at the same time, I surrender myself to the will of God. So basically, human emotions, human feelings have a very special place. And seldom do we realize, or at times we do not realize this, and we think, especially in this mechanical and machine oriented life of today, that if we provide sufficient facilities, sufficient money, or resources to our children, that's all there is perhaps needed, without realizing that the human element, which is much more needed than these facilities, if that is missing, then we are doing something without perhaps realizing that instead of transferring those human feelings, we are actually making our children robots and much more machine oriented than they already are. So I think that we now go on to the next part of our segment, the third segment, and that is the Bible verse of the day. As you can see, the Bible verse which I have selected this time is from the Old Testament, the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verse 12. And it in fact relates to a very common topic, and that is respect for the parents. It says, give honor to your father and to your mother, so that your life may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. So clearly, it is a very, very important advice and counsel from Moses to his people that if you heed your father and your mother, your life would be long. Of course, here the intended meaning is that it's going to be something which will last for generations. Generations will benefit from this, and the land of Palestine, which the Almighty is giving them, is something in which, if this happens, then they will live a life of immense comfort. Now, we need to realize that the Exodus, or the book of in fact, the Old Testament was set in this tribal society in which the importance of a father and mother, similarly, the extended family, is immense. And besides that, of course, if even discount this special tribal setting, the importance of this verse is that as children, as young adults, we need to realize that parents who have much more experience, parents might have a different opinion, parents might have something which we might not agree to, but at the same time, we have to respect them. We have to honor them. We have to be very, it's not that we may not differ with them as children. Each child, if he's a grown-up child, has this human right. It's a question of a human right, I would say, to differ with his or her parents if there is a need. But at the same time, we cannot dishonor them or show disrespect to them. And the parents also must realize that they must not think that if their child is differing with their decision or with their advice, it's not that he or she is showing disrespect to them. It's not that he or she is showing or dishonoring them, because this is an entirely different thing. Children, when they are adults, they have been given this right, none other by the Almighty, to take a final decision in any matter which relates to them. It could be a spouse, a spousal matter, for example, selection of a spouse, or it could be a selection of your career. In both these instances, the Almighty has given this right to the adult to make a decision, to the adult child to make a decision. Parents must honor this decision. Parents must respect this decision. And if they have a difference, they have all the right to express this difference. They have all the right to tell their children that they are doing something wrong, but then they don't have a right to forcibly stop their children from taking any decision in this regard. So it has to be on both sides. On the one hand, children need to respect their parents, they need to honor them, and at the same time, if they differ with their parents, parents must not think that this is something which is like dishonoring them or showing disrespect to them, because to have an opinion is the right of every single individual if he's a grown up person. It's the right of every person to have the opinion, to have an opinion in any matter that he or she thinks relates to him. However, we need to understand that as parents, they have spent more time on earth. And hence, if they are advising us regarding certain things, then we should pay heed to that advice. We might not accept it, but we must deal each advice with merit. We must try to find out truth behind it. We might not agree with it ultimately, but dismissing it without even hearing it is, of course, something that might be our own loss or the loss of the child at the same time. So I think that this is sufficient as far as this explanation is concerned. With this note, I would end this third text as well, that as parents, we need to respect our children's decisions. We must not pry on their privacy. We must give importance to their own personality. We must not impose our own social and religious opinions on them. We can suggest to them, we can help them out in their own problems. We can do all that we can in a very amicable and suggestive way. But we have not been given this right, or it is beyond our jurisdiction to force our cultural opinion or our religious opinion or our worldview on them. All that we can do is to discuss with them. And may I dare say that the best judge of a good parent is that he or she has developed such a strong bond with the children that whenever a child does something wrong, the first thing that happens is that instead of hiding the fault or instead of confiding that fault with someone else, that child goes straight to his parents or her parents and expresses his or her uh, mistake right in front of them. This would mean that he has or she has been given such confidence by the parents that he or she does not need to go to anyone else or to feel remorse or to feel guilt, then to go to the parent and express this so that they can help him out or her out. And at the same time, also acknowledge the fact that all of us are human beings. We make mistakes. We cannot be sin free. And of course, the Almighty also does not expect us to be so. All we need to do is to learn from our mistakes. And parents in this regard have a very, very special place. And I do wish that all of us make up those good parents, become those good parents to whom their children come without any hindrance whenever they do something bad, and openly discuss it with them. And as a result, the problem is something is a step forward towards being solved. So, dear viewers, this brings us to the end of our first session. And before we go on to discuss a misconception that we normally take up, in case you have any questions, please let me know. I will open your mic. So I can see Yasin Yasin Fahad's mic. So I've just unmuted your mic, Yasin Fahad. Could you please proceed with your question?
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. I have a question about the affection and the appreciation, because when I was married and I came to my in-laws, the general rule was that, the actual praise or the appreciation is not on the face but behind the back.
Right.
So kind of spent years here. For some years, I guess I adopted that, but then at times I really wanted them to appreciate me for all the hard work I was doing. And but like I wanted to understand, because even I've heard elders saying it's not a good idea to praise your children in front of someone else or on their face. Why would they have that opinion? Like, I've seen that in older elders, our elders. Was there a specific reason for it? Like why they had that kind of thinking?
Right. So,
You see, we were just discussing culture some moments ago, and apparently this seems to be a part of our Eastern culture of yesteryears, in which generally people would or children would not be praised by their parents directly, and they would receive this praise indirectly from some other relative, maybe, who would pass it on, and we would not hear this praise directly from them. You see, there are always instances in which, when we think that expressing praise profusely or at times in a wrong situation might lead that person to become more conceited, might lead the boy or a girl to lose this humility in him or her. So there are instances in which, of course, this this can be a choice, but again, it has to be a prudent choice. It has to be a choice in which this does not become the rule. You see, there are exceptions. At times, you praise your children on their faces because they need encouragement. At other times, you have to be judicious and wise enough to know that a direct praise might ruin their enterprise. It might make them overconfident. It might actually make them lose the climb that they need to reach the summit. So I think that we need to understand that whatever we study from the Prophet is always situational. It is situated in a context. And when the Prophet was expressing the fact that we should show our feelings towards our younger generation, he meant that when the time is such that this has to be shown to encourage them, to show affection to them, to give them this psychological boost, we must not abstain as if it is asceticism or as if it is something which is like indulgence in the pleasures of life, as people would see. So, and benefiting from the advice of the Prophet always has to be in context. And it, of course, as I said, there are exceptions in which at times parents withhold this praise. But the culture that you were speaking of previously, or the fact that we as people living in India and Pakistan in Eastern society often face this culture, of course, it has been exported to other countries as well, is the culture in which it was actually made a rule that children would not be praised. And I think this is something that we need to revise. And we have to make it dependent on the situation. We have to make it dependent on a prudent selection of time. So it is just that the Prophet is cautioning us and prodding us that don't become hard hearts, don't become people who think that providing resources is enough as far as your feelings are concerned. You have to express your feelings as well. It's not just about providing them bread and butter. It's more about transferring the legacy of love to them as well. So I would say that the Prophet has to be understood in the situation in which perhaps he was making these comments.
Thank you.
So I have a question. I have a hand being raised by
uh, please proceed with your question. I think there's something wrong with your mic. Please check your mic. It seems there's something wrong with the mic. So maybe you can set right your mic, and later on, at the end of the second session, we can come back to you as well. So now let me go start off with the second segment of our study circle. In this second segment, we generally discuss a certain misconception or a misperception. And the one that I've chosen today actually is a question which our younger generation often poses us, especially generation which lives in Western countries. And that is that this phenomena of dating or developing friendship with the opposite gender much before marriage. How is it viewed by Islam? How does religion views this friendship, which actually starts off with maybe a friendship amongst class fellows or colleagues or even neighbors, and it ends up when children grow or enter into adolescence, it enters into a very natural encounter, which is actually uh, formally called as dating. Now, just to give you a very short overview, that this dating actually began many couple of centuries ago, presumably in France, where it was chaperoned dating, which meant that in order to find matches for each other, various boys and girls meet in the presence of their parents, and these parents would then try to make this bond of friendship develop between the children in their presence, and so that it would make this decision for themselves also very easy, and also provide an opportunity for the boy and girl to meet each other, to find out each other's views, and then ultimately take a decision. So this is how dating presumably started in 18th century France, or maybe slightly later. But today, as you can see, that it has become a much more developed form of friendship, in which boys and girls they meet each other, they indulge in sexual relations also, and more often than not, especially in Western societies, uh, these our counterparts. They when they get actually married to one another, they have already have had sexual experiences, or they have already have a baby already before marriage, and then they announce that they are getting married as well. So this has become a norm in Western societies, and our Muslim children, when they grow up in these societies, they have this question that why should we not follow suit, and why should this be a means of something of embarrassment, or parents taking strong exception to it. Now, we need to, again, as I said, all these questions.
The important thing is that we have to reach back to the Quran and to find out the answer from the Quran itself. So, if we study the Quran, the most important thing which it tells us is that the Almighty is extremely sensitive to the formation of a family unit, because it is the building block of a society, and because it is the foremost means of providing and nurturing and nourishing the young child which is born into every family. Now, what happens is that temporary unions, friendships, dating, and all such, I would say, rendezvous, they are addictive in nature. So when we indulge in this friendship between the opposite gender before marriage, this addiction does not is it I, this actually this relationship becomes an addiction. And even after marriage, the when the requirement is that the spouses must devote each other for themselves, their emotions must remain for each other, very pure and very, very private and personal. But when we have had relationships in our earlier life before marriage with other women, or friendships, or any sort of dating outings, this purity between the spouses is damaged after marriage, because the addiction which was there actually has made our emotions go haywire. And instead of becoming profoundly devoted to a single spouse, what happens is, because of the pre-marital conduct, the way we behave, our friendship with other women, and similarly, speaking of boys and men with other men as well, continues after marriage, and this severely hampers the family unit. This severely dents a blow to the family unit. And because the Almighty does not want this to happen, it wants the family unit to be protected the foremost, because this is the building block of a society. This is the only institution which can provide and nourish and nurture the young life that a mother and a father bring into existence. And anything which goes against it is bound to dent this institution. So, temporary relationships, dating, since they become addictive, so after marriage, one is not able to devote oneself to the spouse only. Feelings for the opposite gender, because they have been woken up much earlier, even after marriage, they continue. And when they continue, one's relationship with the spouse does not remain, neither does it remain pure, nor does the extent of devotion which is needed. And as a result of this devotion, the emotional expression and the emotional need of the new child, which is brought into existence by the family, he or she is also not taken care of. Why? Because the marriage bond between between the father and the mother is not that strong, and they had extramarital relations before their marriage, and since this is a thing which is addictive in nature, more often than not, they do so after marriage as well. So, because Islam wants to protect, and I think every religion does want to protect the unit of the family, this temporary union before marriage is discouraged, because after marriage, this addictive behavior becomes a norm, and it dents and damages the family unit. So, I would say that as elders, as parents, this is how we should try to make our children understand the importance of the unit of the family, and how important it is for us to remain devoted as spouses to each other. And anything which is done contrary to it is going to damage this institution. So, in order to respect this institution, in order to give it importance, in order to find its blessings and benefits pervade the society, this protective buffer, I would say, which the Almighty has placed on this institution of marriage, that any temporary union, whether before marriage or after marriage, is must be put an end to, because it will not make those spouses very faithful to each other. And when this does not happen, the family unit is not going to prosper. And when the family unit is not going to prosper, what will happen is that the biggest sufferer is that child who is brought into existence. So this is, my dear viewers, a very essential teaching that we need to transfer to our next generation. That we need to tell them that as far as relationships are concerned, they have to be in the form of marriage. They have to be in the form of a permanent union and not a temporary friendship. So this brings us to an end to this second session as well. I try to explain to you how important it is for the family unit before the Almighty, and how essential it is for us to preserve it. And for this, the Almighty has given us various sanctions and various directives. So we now, of course, come to the final session, in which, if you have any questions regarding the this final session, or any general question, now is the time that you can ask this question.
Discuss your views about it. So I'm opening the mic of Rafia Khwaja Saiba. If you have a question, kindly please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Dr. I have two questions. One is it's not pertaining to today's topic, but I'd like to know that I had opened a fixed deposit account for 3 months, which is like it rolls over account, and some interest accrues on that account. I wasn't very sure whether I can take this interest. uh, I, I'm not very familiar with the banking procedure, or what, as far I'm concerned, is what Allah allows. And so I wanted you to clarify that. I'm told that the money, if it is not excessive, I can take, but I'm not very clear about it. And my second question, I'll again tell you, is I wanted to know the meaning of taqwa. So if you could kindly answer these two questions. And the
Right.
third, pertaining to your lecture, you talked about sexual experience. Isn't sex before marriage a sin? Like adultery is a sin. So if you could clear this too also. Thank you.
Right.
So, as far as interest is concerned, I think we have discussed this many times that earning anything through interest is something which has been which is actually morally wrong, and hence that is why the Almighty has prohibited it. And only when there is no option left, for example, lady could not have does not have any other means, or she is indisposed, or there is no other avenue for her to earn. So it's only when there is no other way out that interest should be actually resorted to, earning of through interest. So these most of these banking schemes, these fixed deposit schemes, I most of them, they are a means of earning interest. However, there are certain other schemes as well in which the element of interest, although is there, but since it's the government returning the money, like public securities and government bonds, the matter does not remain as I would say heinous as it is to a general dealing of interest. So in those cases, perhaps it can benefit it from them as well. But other than that, if it is not the case, and if it's a case of earning interest, simple interest from your bank, it has to be avoided because this is something which is not morally on. As far
But
as
Dr.
your
Shehzad, what about profit and loss? There's something called a profit and loss
Right.
amount
So
where
as far
the
as the,
interest is not
so,
fixed.
okay, right. So as far as the profit and loss amount is
concerned, that is absolutely allowed. And I would say that if you're thinking of conventional banking that is going on in Pakistan or in some other countries, although we know that it's a profit and loss account, however, if you go deeper down, we'll find out that there is no question of any loss. It's always a profit, and whatever the nature of the transaction, this profit is always given to the person who has actually given the loan. So there is this, of course, this question that if you think that you're sufficiently covered, and you think that PLS banking or profit and loss banking is the way it actually is, then there is no harm. But if you go deeper down, you'll find out that it's only a claim that people make, that PLS banking is something which just exists by name. If you go deeper down, you'll find out that it is exactly the same in its mechanism as interest itself.
Dr. Shehzad, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to mention something, that if I give a loan to somebody, I don't expect him to give me more than what I gave him. But keeping in view the inflation value of money, I expect him to give me the same amount. Like I gave him 10 lakhs 10 years ago, the 10 lakhs would not be the same today. It's the same way if I've given the bank 4 lakhs and
hmm
they return it to me after 1 year, that 4 lakhs money will not get me the same today that it would have got me a year ago. So if the first one is
so
allowed,
I do
why would
understand.
not
I
this be allowed?
I do understand your question. And as far as inflationary adjustments are concerned, they are absolutely okay, there's no problem with them. So when you give a loan to someone, so and you expect the same loan to be returned, and you would like the value of the money, the depreciation because of inflation, also you would like to cover it, then you can easily link it to a very stable commodity, like for example gold, and you can say that okay, if I'm giving you maybe 1 million rupees today, let's let's see its worth in gold. For example, if it's, let's say, hypothetically, it's about 100 carats. So what you'll return after 5 years is this 100 carat gold, whatever the value of that gold is. So by linking up to a stable commodity, that can always be done. My previous reply was actually to interest-bearing transactions. This is not interest at all. This is loan, pure loan that you're talking about. And when you give something or to someone, any loan that you would like to give, and you would like the value of money also not decrease, and you would like the effects of inflation also not creep in, then as I said, that this adjustment has been suggested by many scholars, that uh, instead of dealing in this loan or giving out this loan in currency, you can link it to any stable commodity, and then ask the person to whom you have lent that loan, that you would like to receive the value of that commodity after a certain period of time when the loan is due to be returned.
But this is, I'm giving the bank the money. I'm giving a bank a part of my saving. This is a loan to the bank. So what's the difference?
You see that the
The difference is that the bank says that it does not acknowledge this depreciation. What I'm saying is this is what is recommended that should be done. The bank, on the other hand, does not acknowledge this. It says that whatever you're giving is basically being returned to you with interest. So when they are giving this interest back to you, it's not because they are covering that depreciation. That is something which they never have any intention to. Although this I would say is an injustice that is being done, but at the same time, what is being done is that they are returning this money in the form of interest, not in the form of adjustment of inflation. However, I do concede that there is this the difference of opinion in certain scholars as well, who think that they earn this interest or they make it allowable to themselves, because what is happening is that they are just getting back what they have lent in real terms. But my own personal opinion here is that unless banks also acknowledge this inflationary adjustment, uh, until that time, we should not actually try to convince ourselves as such, because what banks are actually giving us is what they have declared as interest. It's like an avowed declaration from them that they are returning interest and they are not compensating us for inflation.
So the Behbood schemes and government schemes you said are okay.
I said that as
As
far
far as government invested securities are concerned, like Behbood schemes and other, although they also give you interest, but the heinous nature of an interest-bearing transaction is lessened much more here, because here the government is actually returning to you without your own demand. It is actually returning something to you, whatever it can. So this is a big difference between a normal interest-based transaction with a bank and something which goes on with the bank. Here, actually, what you're doing is that you're leaving your money to them, and they are returning whatever they think that they would like to return. So, although it still has this string of interest in it, but as I said,
it's the dreadful nature of that is reduced much.
Thank you. So could you now explain about taqwa and the
the
sexual
second,
thing with Shreya?
yeah, the second question
I
that you
asked
asked was
you the
regarding,
meaning of taqwa, and the third was when you said about sexual relationship. I asked you, isn't it a sin to have premarital sex?
So as I said, that let me first answer the second question. That taqwa, if you read in the parlance of the Quran, is to fear God's displeasure, and we would not like to cross limits so as to invoke the Almighty's displeasure. So there are certain limits which the Almighty has set.
for us, that we must not cross. For example, there are limits regarding our relationship with God. There are limits which regard our relationship with our brethren, and so on and so forth. So it's like remaining within those limits. It's like remaining within that boundary. If we cross that boundary, if we go all out of that boundary, we exceed limits. And it is here that we say that a breach of taqwa has occurred. This is the simplest definition that I can think of, that to remain within the rules, defined rules for a particular relationship or a particular directive is what we call taqwa. It means that we would like to stay within those bounds because we would not like to displease the Almighty. Because if we exceed the limits, if we cross the limits, we go out of bounds, it is something that we are inflicting a harm on our own selves. And if we would like the Almighty that He should not be displeased with us, it is not because this displeasure has something to do with His own interest. It is because it's got to do with our own interest. When we cross the limits, it is something which is bad for us. And whatever is bad for us is a means or a source of the Almighty's displeasure. So it's not that the Almighty gets angry because of certain reasons which are known to Him. He gets angry when we think that we are doing something terrible to our own selves. And hence, He says that we have to remain within those limits. So this is as far as taqwa is concerned. And now, as far as your question regarding premarital sex is concerned, I never said that it's allowed. Of course, it's totally forbidden. Sexual relations of any sort are only allowed after marriage. I was actually trying to explain that when our children ask that why is dating or premarital sex prohibited by Islam or not viewed in the proper light or not allowed by Islam, then we have to explain to them the importance of the family unit and tell them that this disallowance, this prohibition, this forbiddance is because Islam wants to protect the family system. And anything which jeopardizes this family system is stopped by it. And since premarital relations, they jeopardize this family system because these premarital relations, these premarital friendships, as I said, they are addictive in nature. Once you start on them, they become an addiction and you just cannot stop. And even after marriage, there is a very strong chance that instead of being devoted to your spouse, you still are distracted by other people, by other women, or by other men. So I was trying to explain how we should actually convince our children or tell them that if they are living in Western societies where dating or premarital sex is a norm, then how and why do we, followers of Islam, think that this is something which they must abstain from? So, my take here is that instead of scolding them or instead of telling them off, we have to make them understand the importance of the family unit and why this family unit has been given this protection by the Almighty. So, we have to reason out all the prohibitions and the allowances of the Quran and Islam before our next generation, instead of dogmatically just telling them not to do certain things or to do certain things. So we have to explain to them the reason of certain prohibitions, as I've just done in this case, and also at times explain to them the reasons of certain positive directions or directives which the Almighty wants us to do. So it has to be a reasonable, reasoned out, and well argued approach that we need to adopt with our children.
Thank you very much.
So I have a hand here from Mr. Talat Wahid. Talat Sahab, your mic is self-muted. Could you, if you have a question, you can please unmute your mic. Yes,
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
you can go on. Ji walaikum salam.
Shehzad sir, my question is related to what was being previously discussed about linking the value of the the cash value, then it's given as a loan, so linking the cash value to a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when the person is going to return that loan, if the value of the commodity has raised and now it's priced higher, so we're expecting the other person to pay according to the value of the commodity. So, but if the price drops, then we should not expect the same amount of money. We should be willing to take the lesser price then. At the same token, that we took the higher price. Yes.
Right. So that is the flip side. Actually, when the price drops, that is not the intention, of course. When you link it to a stable commodity, it means that the commodity is going to remain as it is. That is why it's called a stable commodity. Of course, if it's going to drop the way we think it is dropping, then it's actually no longer fit to be classified as a stable commodity. You would see that gold prices, for example, once they go up, they remain up and they seldom
Yeah.
come down. Similar is the case with many other commodities.
Right.
So a stable commodity is one which is not affected by market
Mm.
values as far as possible. So it's not that it's a perfect solution, but
Yeah.
it's a possible or a solution in which we can see some light in which the person who is lending the the injustice that he or she might suffer because of this inflation and
Yeah.
depreciation is reduced to the least as much as is possible.
Yeah. Well, the point that I'm trying to make is that why should the lender be always protected and not the one who is taking the loan there? I mean, the two parties are involved in there. So
Right.
if the lender is looking for, is wants to protect himself, that I should be immune to to receive lesser amount of
So you see,
lesser amount of money, then
so you see, as I said,
is it
if
my
you just
phone
link
that's
it,
doing this?
you don't. What
I hear a phone.
I'm suggesting here is that may I request someone whose phone is ringing here and their mic is also on to kindly please.
Is this my phone that's ringing?
Yes, yes, I think so.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how to mute the phone while I'm talking to
Okay,
you.
that's fine.
Okay.
So you see,
So what
that
I'm saying is, yeah.
if you link your loan to a commodity like gold, as I gave you this example, that you are lending 10 carats of gold to a person, and which is equivalent, let's say, hypothetically, to 1 million rupees. Now you want that 10 carat gold back at the end of 2 years or 3 years, whatever the
Right.
value of that 10 carat gold. So it's not
Yes.
that if the value drops, you're going to still have the original amount. You are actually lending that 10 carat gold to your the person who is borrowing it from you,
Yeah.
and you're expecting those 10 carats of gold being returned to you.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that instead of dealing in money or currency, you deal in a commodity. You link it up once, and when you write it down, you say that, okay, today I'm lending to you an equivalence in currency of 10 carats of gold. Tomorrow I'm going to would like the same 10 carats of gold,
Yeah.
whatever be the value when you
Yeah.
return it.
Yeah. But Javed Ahmed Ghamdi Saab also mentioned something about the usable and the uh, and the
Consumable and non-consumable, yeah.
consumable and not consumable. So what we're seeing here is the two people who are involved in this exchange of money. So to me it looks like that the benefit or the loss should be applicable equally to both parties. So because see, we are
Well,
not really sir, we are not giving the gold and we are not taking the gold back. We're giving the cash and we are taking the cash back. Do you see my point? I mean, then
you
if
see,
you really want to give money to the person, you should
but
yourself buy the gold and give it to the other person and say, give me this gold back, rather than giving him the cash, but still linking it to a commodity, because you're not giving that commodity to that person. You're not giving that material to that person. You're giving the cash. So when you're
right.
taking the cash, you do see my point?
Yes, I
in
do.
act- in
So,
real in
so
actuality in reality you're just saying that I'm giving you the value of this thing, but you're not giving the person the gold, you're giving the
right,
cash.
right. That's it.
So
So first, let me clarify that as
yeah.
Far as this usable and non-usable thing is concerned, that's I think an entirely different issue, and
Okay.
this relates to commodities which are usable or non-usable. For example, money is a usable commodity.
Yeah.
The food is a usable commodity. Grain
Yes.
is a usable commodity. On the
Yes.
other hand, houses are not usable, and hence
Yes. Yes.
when Ramadi Saab makes this point regarding usable and non-usable commodities, he's actually trying to make a difference to or trying to explain the difference between rent and riba, and
Yeah.
telling people That
Okay.
rent is always charged on non-usable commodities like houses, and riba is charged over usable commodities like money or grain or food.
Yeah.
So that's a slightly different discussion. Now, what you actually raised here is that you would like to say that you're actually not lending the commodity itself, you are just lending the equivalence of that commodity in currency. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that in order to protect both the buyer and the
Yeah.
sorry, borrower and the lender,
Yeah.
if the lender ends up seeking the same amount or asking the same amount or being returned the same amount as he or she did lend it earlier on, he or she would end up in understandably in a big loss because money over a period of time always depreciates. It
Yeah.
always loses its
Yeah.
value.
Yeah.
So it's just to safeguard that value that you link it up to a currency. So it's not that you're lending the currency. What you're saying is you're telling us that the real value of this currency today is what I would like to be returned tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
So that is why we say that linking it up to a commodity which is stable, whatever the value of that stable commodity is going to safeguard or ensure that the loss which is acquired by the lender as a result of inflation, which of course is 10%, 15% each year, that does not affect the money that he has lent.
Yes. Sorry, I was distracted because somebody came to the door. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but then, isn't this issue started with connecting it to the interest we are talking about, or the suit that we are talking about, that we want to have a clear understanding because we are loaning the money to somebody, and then
You
we are
see,
getting, we can only take that amount back.
right. When you are lending an amount to someone, and the understanding is that you are gaining over and above that lent amount, uh, that is something which is clearly stated as interest. But when you are actually making this agreement with that person, that you're linking your loan to a commodity, and you would like the value of that commodity to be returned, then this cannot be termed as riba in any sense of the word. Because you see, when you lend in riba or in interest, you are not concerned with the value of the money. What you're concerned is that whatever money you have lent, you are given over and above that money. So
Yeah.
you would like to earn through lent money. It's like earning through a usable commodity.
Yeah.
And that is precisely why all divine religions prohibit riba, because it's a
Yeah.
means of extortion, and people have to not only generate the amount which have been borrowed by them, but
Yeah.
also something significant over and above that amount, which makes it a
Right.
very, very tall order. And I think this distinction needs to be made. This does not account for riba at all.
Yeah.
This is like linking your money to its original value. Riba is entirely a different mindset. It's a mentality which you are
Okay.
not concerned with this
Okay.
depreciation. We'd like to earn money through borrowing.
Yeah. So I mean, presetting the amount of and the timing, that if you don't return this amount of money, plus the interest in a certain period of time, that will be then riba. Like the time factor and presetting the raised, I mean, a certain amount of added money that needs to be returned. So that
Right.
actually is a riba.
That
Yeah.
basically is riba. Yeah.
That's riba. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Shehzad. I think it's clear to me now.
Okay, that's fine. So I think we have a raised hand from Mr. Nashrad Shafkat. I think he said, yes, please go ahead, Mr. Nashrad.
Hello, Doctor. Hope you can hear me. I was having some
Uh,
problems.
we can barely hear you actually. There's a lot of noise in your mic.
Right, Doctor. My question was with regard to reading of tafsir. You said that we must just consult tafsir and not read tafsir. Uh, I find that a little odd because I think that by reading the tafsir, you can better understand the context, the relevance, and the meaning of the quoted verse. And it would be always better to not read the tafsir as one book, but to consult it and to, make clear what was the context in which this verse was revealed, who was it addressed to, how it came to be applied during the time of the Prophet. And I just wanted to be clear about that point. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. So you see,
If you read a good translation, the points that you have made, all these things you get to know about them by simply reading through a good translation. It is if you pick up certain other translations in which the question remains. I was actually referring to that, the fact that if there is a question which still remains, it is then the time that you consult tafsir. Because you see, when you read a tafsir, if you have this experience, you would know this, that there are a lot of things which a tafsir explains, which actually are not needed to be explained, because they make it a point to explain each and every verse. They have to say something, write something. So you don't have a question about that. You say, okay, it's such something that's so obvious. So you spend more time in reading tafsir instead of reading what the word of God is. So when you read a translation, you're closer to what God is saying. And when you're reading the tafsir, you're closer to what a human being is saying. So I'm not saying that we should not read the tafsir. What I'm saying is that the closer you remain to the word of God, and whenever there is a question, for example, you said that there is a question of context or some historical issue, and you are not able to gauge it from the translation itself, then that is the time to consult tafsir. But what if there is no question in your mind? Then there is the better option or the better approach that I think is that you read more of the Quran instead of spending time on the part that you have already understood. It's like spending more time on the next part. So, and also I would also say that this is more of a beginner's approach, what I'm referring to. As far as advanced readers are concerned or advanced students are concerned, they can consult the seed on a more regular basis, I would say. I was actually referring it to a beginner or maybe a initial student of the Quran, to
Right,
whom the
Doctor. Right,
meaning of
I
the Quran.
understand. Right, right, Doctor. Thank you very much. Because there are many verses which I've been reading the tafsir for a number of years now. And for example, one verse which comes immediately to mind is verse 124 of Surah Baqarah. وَإِذِ ابْتَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ رَبُّهُ بِكَلِمَاتٍ فَأَتَمَّهُنَّ. I read the tafsir of Ghamidi Saab, then also listened to a lecture of his. It was only then that I was able to really appreciate, and it sank into me, so that
mm,
now I can go on and preach it to others and try and spread the word of God in this way. This is my humble way of spreading God's word, and I think that reading the tafsir should come. I agree, after you have read the translation and the meaning of the Quran a number of times, and then you can go to tafsir. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab.
right.
I'm sorry for having been online and my mic not working earlier. Thank you very much.
Perfectly okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have passed our stipulated time. So let's end it here, inshallah, and hope that you have a good, enjoyable weekend. And see you, inshallah, on the 28th of this month, next Saturday. Until then, it is Khuda Hafiz.